you can see in all these ancient cultures before we got to this nadir point, before Adam Smith was writing, before we got to all this point, we were with democratic rights, blah, blah, blah. Before we had all these ancient cultures, and in none of those cultures do I think you would find a house is an asset in play.
Mm-hmm.
Economically, it would be there. It would have to be built. It would cost. There'd be labor. There'd be bricks. But it doesn't have to be conceived as an asset in play.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean it doesn't have a value or a price or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get to this place, suddenly everything is an asset in play. Suddenly everything has to be there. So I can just cash in and cash out on the whole economy. It doesn't matter what it is. And I'm going to get rich by cashing in and cashing out.
Mm-hmm.
We turn everything into a commodity. It's like if we get to this point and we don't just make the distinction between our narrow selves, our self-centeredness, and our wider selves, if we don't do that, we will turn everything into a commodity. We cannot exist in our self-centered space unless everything becomes a commodity. It's ineluctable. It's somehow the alchemy of it all. In order for me to live on my own, self-centered, in a world full of millions of other people and all the rest of it, the only way I can do that is turn everything around me into a commodity, including my neighbors, or the air that's outside my window, whatever it may be. And so you won't get beyond this unless we can somehow live into this other space, which doesn't turn everything into a commodity.
Yeah.
If you could go right back into the 12th century and into King John and Shakespeare play King John and the commodification. He's not talking about making things you can buy and sell. He's talking about this very subtle alchemy. If I become self-centered in a world which I'm not alone in, which I'm not Robinson Crusoe on my island, even he had Man Friday. But if you make this image that a lot of the philosophers behind modern economics make, I'm alone on my island, I depend on nobody. If you make such an image, you would turn the whole world into a commodity. By definition, you cannot avoid doing this. It's in the alchemy of it. And so the more we go to this place, by whatever way we get there, I'm doing it by analytical means, the more you go to this place, the more you will not think in those terms.
Mm-hmm.
And then you will relax all the pressure you put on things, especially land, labor, and capital. You will not think of them as commodities. You will not treat them as commodities. I just wanted to share this image. Where is it? Over here.
Yeah.
Just to reinforce as an image what I said earlier, that for Rudolf Steiner, the yellow circle is the economic process, and it's within the infrared and the world of land, and the ultraviolet that way, and the world of what we're going to call capital. And it exists between these two worlds. And I just wanted to show that image, because this is an image. Inside that circle, everything is a commodity, and everything in it has to be a commodity by internal definition. Outside that circle, behind those two, infrared and the ultraviolet, nothing is a commodity. And as long as, if you can just think, not everything is a commodity, we can start to unpick our problem. But if we think everything is a commodity, his point is it's just not true. It's just not economically true. And I just wanted to show that, because that's the kind of, he never drew this image to my knowledge, but that's an image of what he said. The economic process only concerns the production, distribution, and consumption of goods, commodities, but it takes place in the context of nature, the transformation of nature resources on the one hand, and the inspiration or the intuition we get from the, I won't even say from the spiritual world, from somewhere outside our brain. Whatever, from the blue sky comes all this stuff on which we rely, especially in modern finance. So I wanted to kind of come back to this kind of image of, so people don't think that circle can expand to include what's on either side. And I'm saying it for a very specific historical reason. There are two things which in modern terms Steiner doesn't include in the economic process. One is intellectual property, what we call intellectual property, and the other would be something like the neem tree.
What is that?
The neem tree is a particular tree, I think, mainly in India, and you can make hair products from it. It's very good for shampoo or whatever. I don't know the detail, but those things like that, the neem tree and intellectual property are not in Steiner's mind. These are not commodities, nor were they in the world as a whole until the general agreement on tariffs and trade was ended by the creation of the World Trade Organization on the 1st of January 1995. And apart from everything else, the general agreement on tariffs and trades came after Bretton Woods, and it was multilateral agreements all over the place between countries, and nobody got to control this. And this is something the Americans cannot abide. So they, together with the French, wanted to create the World Trade Organization. And in the end, they succeeded. They started to do this in the early 50s. But in the end, they succeeded in January 1995, and they got rid of the GATT, no multilateral, networky type agreements. We have a World Trade Organization, which has its court and it has its rules of conduct. It's really, really not the way to go. And in doing this, they included in there intellectual property and things like the neem tree. So that, for example, I'm not saying this has happened, but so that, for example, an American corporation can now acquire intellectual property, an idea which God sent to somebody, if you see what I'm saying. And it can also acquire the right to the neem tree. So all neem trees now belong to me. These are very subtle things. And so I wanted to show this image because in the World Trade Organization, up until then, the world was organized the way Steiner described it. But after then, very deliberately, the whole realm of intuition is now commodified, intellectual property, and so is the whole nature base. This is very important because until then, his interpretation was a match for what was happening. Now we have in the world something which is systematically opposed to what he's doing or what he's seeing. And I just want to include that because it's on the one hand, it's an image, but this is something which was 95. He was already 70 years in his grave, as it were. So he couldn't have commented on it actually. And this is the kind of thing you have to kind of, to bring Steiner up to date and keep him relevant, you need to kind of scan the horizon for what's happened since he died. He may well have said, be careful, this might happen, but I don't think he did. But I would say the same. Be careful. Once you get clear how the economy is, you'll get very clear about the interests that are in the world, including your own, which don't want that. Because this is the difference between the economics of self-centeredness and the economics of a cosmopolitan life. And don't underestimate the forces in the world that want a self-centered economy, and don't leave yourself out. Don't say, yeah, but they don't affect me, because I think this is an illusion. I'm not talking about you personally.
No, I just want to make this clear for myself for a moment. A patent was existing before 1995, right? The idea of a patent and also copyrights by an author or by a musician existed. So what was new after 95 in that sense?
I think both in copyright and in patent, there's a discussion you can have within that. But the basic idea was you recognize, like with copyright, this is what Goethe was involved in. You recognize that an individual, in my language, received a gift from the god, a poet, or Beethoven, or whoever it was, received something which you can't possibly say, this is German only. It'd be ridiculous to say of a Beethoven symphony, only Germans can understand it, or only Germans can play it, or only Germans can enjoy it. This is nonsense. So culture will always appear to a specific person, maybe in a specific culture, but it's belonging already to everyone's portfolio. You see what I mean? It's just not possible to divide it all up. And so it was understandable that this will happen, and therefore the person, this is me speaking, the person through whom this comes into culture, we need to recognize in his or her lifetime, a revenue stream linked to this, but not linked beyond that and not linked beyond him. or her. So in principle, it attaches to the person who had the idea, not to all his and her heirs forever after, right? And for his lifetime. All that is kind of messed up by the economics of self-centeredness. But as a kind of intimation of a higher kind of understanding, it's perfectly understandable. Similarly with pattern, it's saying this person on, I put it in economic terms. I give you a very crazy example. One man, I think it was called Percy, he invented what we call the cat's eye, which means in a highway, you go down the highway, they've probably been removed now. There was a point when first they put the white line in, so you knew which side of the highway you were in. This wasn't there when the first highways. So they put this in. And of course, you can't see those very easily at night. So this guy invented what he called cat's eyes. There were little things you set in the tarmac, right? They were just like crystal glass. And so they reflected your headlights. And so you could see the road way ahead, right?
Yeah.
And for these, I think for this invention, he got a farthing per one. Per cat's eye, he got 1 farthing. He had a pattern, right?
Okay. Yeah.
It's an interesting. So each one of these, he got a farthing. I mean, which is, I don't know, almost nothing now, right? And he became very, very rich. He never left his little house he lived in. The only thing you saw different, he had a big Rolls Royce outside his little house, which was longer than his house. So he needed his neighbors' parking spaces. It's a fascinating story that he didn't buy 10 houses and 50 houses in the yacht. He just stayed where he was, right? And anyway, I love this story. And but the pattern was, okay, we recognize you've invented something which we all benefit from. And so the way I understand that is, yes, the pattern on the one side, he gets his farthing. But if I didn't have those things on the street, what would it cost me to hit someone head on in the middle of the night? So the way to evaluate his pattern is the benefit I got from what he invented.
Yeah.
Not from wishing I had the farthing that he's getting. Right?
So what changed in 95 in that aspect? What changed?
I'm just saying the spirit behind pattern and the spirit behind copyright is of this kind.
Yeah.
It's recognizing in a kind of overall economy the role of the individual, and you don't then snatch that from him or deny him copyright. A lot of people do, even in Goethe's time, right? Nor do you do the reverse. You don't sort of ransom the whole of humanity to your intellectual property, which is kind of what corporations do when they say the neem tree belongs to me. Because then they can go and rent the neem trees in India to all the Indian farmers who until then thought they were their trees. It's an example of a much bigger problem since the World Trade Organization where, it's the Monsanto type story that this wheat that you're growing is not the wheat God gave you, it's the wheat my corporation gave you, and you're in debt to me forever. And unfortunately, when you sow my wheat, God's wheat has no chance of growing. So now you're stuck. I hope I'm not being slanderous to them, but the gesture behind it, of this corporate life, it's not done by people. The gesture behind this kind of corporate life is we now own what previously God provided. And unfortunately, when we own it, God is out of the equation. So now you're stuck with me as your God, right? And now I can charge you whatever I want. And previously, God never charged the Indian for the use of the neem tree. And I just give you another anecdote. If you're a Westerner, so-called Westerner, and you've got so much money, but you live in a horrible cold country, you might want to go and buy yourself a property in Greece on a nice sunny island, which you're only going to go to in the summer months because they're not so nice in the winter. So you buy yourself a property, a nice little old house, surrounded by olive trees. And you need to know the olive trees do not come with the property. So when it's olive harvest time, you should expect the villagers to show up en masse and shake all your olive trees, which are their olive trees, and get all the olives, and you don't get any of these olives. So you have to really know, right? You got the right to live in this old house, which was so old for them, it's not interesting. You have the cash to buy this. That's stupidity number one. But don't think these trees are yours. They're not. They didn't come with the property. And you know, there's a lot of things of this kind of identifying what is valid in self-centered terms and what is not valid, and give it a validity. And then, you know, then you don't have a problem when the peasants turn up and take your olives. And thank God, because you wouldn't want to deal with a, you know, I've been in Greece loads of times. When all your olives are ready for harvest, you wouldn't want that problem. It's very, very messy, right? So you'd be very happy to have someone else come and take the olives away from you, right?
Yeah.
You would enter into a contract for this, where they're just doing it by ancient contracts.
Yeah.
So when you go into any example of this, you can filter out, if you just make the distinction between self-centered economics and, let's say, other-centered economics, just make that distinction and pay unto Caesar what's due to Caesar. Then you can unpack many, many things, both outside and inside.